Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a CPA that's worked in the corporate world, and I've worked in the investment and financial services industries. I've started multiple companies that have achieved millions of dollars in sales, and I've sold companies at multi-million-dollar valuations. You can find more about my background and about the podcast at our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Follow me on Twitter, @HollandPodcast, that's @HollandPodcast, to continue the conversation with us outside of the weekly podcast. Lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, so you get the weekly updates when we post the video version of the podcast every Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us each and every Wednesday, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Today, we're going to talk about something that is so extremely important to every business, small, medium, and large. But it's often very hard to justify the expenditures in this particular area, and that's marketing. We're going to have a long conversation about the different types of marketing at a high level, then get more into specifics, marketing aspects or marketing tools that I've utilized in my businesses, and many of my businesses would have zero success without the level of marketing spend that we did or that we put into the business. And lastly, we're going to talk about metrics or things to be mindful of as a business owner when it comes to all things related to marketing. So let's talk about where marketing fits into business. I'm a big believer that in order to have a successful business, and not only am I a big believer, but as a consumer, this is the case, you have to have a good product, or you want to have a good product. There are multiple companies that I would say have an inferior product, but they do an excellent job of marketing, and so they achieve high success. I believe that's short-lived, and that those companies that have long-term success combine successful products or quality products with excellent customer service, and then they advertise to a large degree to, number one, help people find out about them, and number two, keep their product or their service or their company at the top of the mind. Because in today's age, if you run a marketing campaign, let's say for 3 months, there's so much at our fingertips within a matter of seconds. In order to continue that top of mind mentality for your consumers, you have to be in front of them. And I think you see this frequently. Campbell's Soup is a perfect example. Very seasonal. During the winter months, you notice, if you pay attention on TV or Netflix or Roku or Apple TV, where there's advertisements, just pay attention the next time that happens to how many more times you see a Campbell's Soup advertisement on the TV or listening to the radio or listening to Spotify or YouTube Music during the winter months. They recognize that in spite of the fact they may have spent tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, I haven't looked at their financial statements, last winter to advertise Campbell's Soup, they have to do it every single season to keep them at the top of consumers' minds. That applies to pretty much all businesses. Now, with seasonal businesses, it can be nice when you can focus a large majority of your marketing in a short time frame, but that means you're also very dependent upon having a successful season if you are a cyclical business. Again, just talking about Campbell's Soup. But before we get into the details, I want to talk about marketing in general. So there are two types of marketing, and I'm sure that there are marketing textbooks that maybe break it down with far more complexity. I try to keep it really simple. It makes it easy when I think about marketing in terms of the businesses in which I'm either advising or which I'm running. Indirect marketing is type number one, what I like to call indirect marketing, and direct marketing is type number 2. It took me a long time in the garbage company to understand the difference, or to recognize that when you're going to spend money on marketing, you have to know what your goal is. Which one of those types of marketing are you trying to accomplish? So let's break each one of those down, and then we can talk about, okay, when would be a good time to use indirect marketing? When would be a good time to use direct marketing? So I view indirect marketing more as brand reputation building. It's something that takes a tremendous amount of money over a long period of time, and there's nothing that you can do in a short matter of time to build up that brand image. So a perfect example of this, I would say, is Nike. Nike, of course, has, most people would argue, a quality product, but they have built that image of who they are, the premier choice for athletes and sports and runners and just everyday individuals for shoes, for footwear. Now, of course, Reebok and Adidas, many people would argue that they're the premier brand, but Nike is almost as ubiquitous in the shoe industry as McDonald's is the fast food industry. But that didn't happen overnight. And if you look at a lot of Nike's campaigns, their marketing campaigns, they're not necessarily trying to sell you a specific shoe. Now, there's plenty of them where they are trying to focus or highlight a new shoe or something that just launched. Or maybe they're targeting men for men's footwear or women for women's footwear. But they have a lot of marketing spend on what I would call indirect marketing. It's staying top of the mind and continuing to build that brand, that aura of them being the premier footwear company. Of course, they've got clothing, and I'm just focusing on the shoes aspect of Nike. Took a very long time, and it's very expensive to do that. I think another good example is Rolex. Rolex has developed a brand over a long period of time as the number one luxury watch supplier or manufacturer. And that, if you look at some of their campaigns, are focused on, people flying on jets or people golfing at some of the nicest golf courses around the world or driving luxury vehicles or multi-million-dollar vehicles. That's a focus on building that brand, what I consider indirect marketing. The reason it's important to distinguish that from direct marketing, because as I experienced in multiple businesses, if you go into a marketing campaign and you haven't determined or you haven't labeled the campaign as either indirect or direct, you are setting yourself up to be potentially very disappointed. And it took me a while to learn this in the garbage company. And again, when we're talking about garbage, it's not particularly appealing. Nobody really thinks about it. Nobody really cares. They only care when you don't get their garbage picked up every week, especially when it's hot out and it becomes smelly. So that's a very interesting industry to market in or think about and delineate between the brand reputation and indirect marketing and direct marketing. So let's talk about what direct marketing is. Obviously, if indirect marketing is, or I shouldn't say obviously, but it makes sense or logical that if indirect marketing is more focused on building an overall feel or aura for your company, brand reputation, direct marketing is more focused on gaining specific sales. And for small businesses, I often recommend that you have a combination of these two, but when you're virtually unheard of, regardless of the industry that you're in, you want to focus the majority of your advertising dollars on direct marketing. And I say that for multiple reasons. Number one, when you're a small business or a medium business, but let's stick with the small business and you're just getting started, for example, every dollar that goes out the door is so precious. Now, I don't say that meaning it's not as important for large companies, but there are a lot less dollars when you're just getting started, and you really have to mind your P's and Q's. And so it can be extremely challenging to set aside money for a marketing budget, especially if you're not sure that you can track directly every dollar that you spend to a sale of a good or a service. So let me give you an example. It was year 2 in the garbage company, ProViro, and we were really one of the only local garbage haulers in the area in which we operated, but we weren't the only one. And we had built our company on the local guys. When you call us, you're talking to someone that's living in the same area in which you operate. When you pay for your bill, you're employing employees that are in the area in which you live and your kids are raised. And so you're supporting the local economy. And for us, that was extremely beneficial when we were trying to compete against the larger national carriers, Waste Management, what used to be Advanced Disposal, Republic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we had another local competitor. And so when we were thinking about marketing, and they were starting to grow, they had started a little bit before we did. But the key differentiator between them and between us was year 2, Jeff, my business partner, and I sat down and said, okay, we need to spend some money on marketing. We were bleeding money. We were, of course, still in the red, very capital intensive industry. And we determined, much to our demise, that we weren't going to spend any money because we didn't have any money to spend. Well, that came back to bite us in the foot or the nose or whatever the saying is, because our competitor, our local competitor, decided to spend a significant amount of money. And so we watched their signups. In that industry, it's all about how many customers are you picking up their trash for on a daily basis. And the name of the game there is density. You run the same routes every single week. And if you don't have all the houses on a block, it's really inexpensive. If you're running a certain block and you're already on it and you only have one house, it's really inexpensive to pick up the next 3 houses on the block. So you want to get those houses. It's all about density. Well, we saw them grow dramatically because they spent money on marketing. And had Jeff and I decided to spend money that we didn't have year 2 on marketing, it would have been a very different scenario. And they ended up growing more quickly than we did. Now, in another podcast, we'll talk about how that turned out for them. But year 3 came along, and Jeff and I said, we won't be around for year 4 if we don't spend money on marketing. And it was the hardest thing for us to do because we were still losing a lot of money. How do you spend money on the open abyss, if you will, or the bottomless pit of marketing? Because you can spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions on marketing, and you don't always know if the campaign is successful. And that's where we get back to the point of this whole conversation of indirect marketing and direct marketing. A lot of times we were spending money when we decided to spend money in year 3. And it's not like we weren't advertising at all in year 1 or year 2, but it was a lot of word of mouth, and it wasn't much direct marketing or spending money on marketing in terms of dollars. It was spending our time being out in the community. And that's important, but you really have to do both if you want to grow quickly the way we wanted to. So when year 3 came around, we determined, and I'll take a step back. It's very hard for a lot of businesses to spend money on marketing because you can't get that exact correlation. So we're going to talk about, if you don't have a lot of money to spend on marketing, why you need to, and how you can set yourself up to at least have some level of ability to measure whether the spend on marketing is successful. And that sounds ridiculous. People say, well, you spend money on marketing. How can you not know whether it's successful? Well, it's not that easy, especially depending on whether you're in a service industry or for us in the garbage industry. How did we know whether a customer was signing up or calling either electronically over the internet? And we were one of the first, if not the first in the area. I believe we were, and a lot of people started copying us to allow people to sign up online, not having to talk to a human. And that was revolutionary for us. But we were also the first to spend money on Google Ads. And I want to talk in depth, a lot more in depth later on in this podcast on Google Ads. None of our other competitors were spending money on Google Ads. And you got to remember, this is back in the 2011, 2012. Google Ads was around, but I don't believe it was nearly as prevalent as it is today. Today, it's like obvious, but there's still a lot of businesses that aren't doing it. So we spent a lot of money on Google Ads when we determined we needed to. We were the first ones to do it. And as soon as all of our other competitors saw that, and they obviously could see that we were having some success because they weren't getting the same level of signups as they would year over year, they started doing the same. But my point being is, when we tried to swallow the fact that we had to spend a significant amount of money on marketing that we didn't have, little did we know just how incredibly important it was, even if we couldn't directly measure every dollar. And what we started to do, and the reason as a small business it's so important to spend some money on marketing, is because you have to test multiple methods of getting your company's name to your customers, to your demographic, who you are trying to target, before you are going to know what was the most successful for you. So getting back to, I was a little bit frustrated because we'd spend this money and I couldn't directly trace it one-to-one. And as a CPA brain, if I was an auditor, you should be able to follow the money no matter what. Well, it's not that simple. So I eventually realized, okay, this campaign that we're doing, I shouldn't expect any specific signups from it because we're doing this campaign not for direct new customers, but it's an indirect marketing campaign. We're trying to build the image of ProViro as the local company and establish that feeling of who we were and what we stood for. Now, over time, that will result in new customers, but it's hard to measure one-to-one. Direct marketing, on the other hand, and once I realized this difference and we put it into practice, Jeff and I did, it made me feel a lot more comfortable spending the money. And if you're new to business, even if you're not new to business, this can be a hard concept to grasp, even if you've been through it before. Because if you're in a different industry, okay, what worked in your prior industry, what worked in the garbage industry, has not necessarily worked in the companies that I've operated that were in the construction industry, or were in the medical supplies industry, or in the retail coffee and bike shop industry. And so anytime you operate a company in a different industry, you kind of have to start over, if you will, to determine what methods of marketing, direct marketing, work the best for you. And the same goes for indirect marketing. But if you're trying to measure dollar for dollar to the extent that you can whether a particular campaign is successful, you got to test a number of things, and it's not going to be the same across industries. Now, there are, of course, industry guides where if you're in a retail company and you're like, this has been the most effective method of marketing for us, whether it's radio, TV, direct flyers, Google Ads, if you're selling goods and services on Amazon. I mean, there's so many areas that you can spend your advertising dollars, and I think that's the other reason it's so hard to do, because you don't know which is the right one. The truth of the matter is you're not going to know which is the right one until you try some. So let's talk about where you should spend your money if you are thinking about putting aside a significant amount of funds for marketing. When Jeff and I determined we needed to spend a lot of money, we tried year 3 because we were quickly losing ground to our local competitor and we wanted to stay in business. We tried everything. We tried a whole host of things. And it was a combination of between indirect and direct. And I didn't really understand the difference at the time. And that's part of the frustration. But We tried door to door. We went door to door and dropped off flyers. We tried every door direct mail, where you design a flyer. The post office will put it into certain mail routes that you pick, certain zip codes or mail routes, I guess is the best way to describe it. Certain neighborhoods, they all have their routes, and you could pick what routes you wanted to put a flyer into every single person or business's mailbox that was on that particular route. We've tried radio, we tried television, we tried Google Ads, and Google Ads wasn't necessarily, I mean, yes, we wanted it for direct marketing, but primarily direct marketing, I guess. It wasn't a huge part of our indirect marketing campaign. But what we found out to be the most successful for us, and it was really surprising because this is not what I anticipated, and this goes to show when you're thinking about spending money on marketing, go into it with your eyes wide open. Don't make any predetermined conclusions about what marketing campaigns or what marketing methods are going to be more successful than others. Let the market tell you. Let your customers tell you. We found that radio was by far our most successful method of advertising. Now, one thing we haven't broached the topic when it comes to marketing is, what are you trying to market? What is your campaign specifically saying? And for us, the reason radio was so successful for us was because we came up with a jingle. And we came up with a saying that became basically known throughout the entire Chippewa Valley. I'd say the 50 to 60 mile radius in which we lived and served and operated, where our trucks would pull up to pick up customers' garbage, and the little kids would come out screaming and yelling, "Got garbage? Get ProViro!" Because that was our tagline. Every single radio commercial that we started off with me saying, "Got garbage? Get ProViro!" Kind of long and drawn out. And we were very deliberate about making sure that we said that over and over and over and over again. At the beginning of every radio commercial, at the end of every radio commercial. And it turned out to be a wild success. And it probably caused, I don't know the exact numbers, our company to grow 4 to 5 times faster than it otherwise would. And that was one where we could, when we talked with customers over the phone, we could ask them, "How did you hear about us?" Or online, we had a choice where you can say, "How did you hear about us?" Now, those aren't always really accurate, but when people pick the radio, we obviously saw a ton more signups come in focused on or because of the radio. And so that made us feel really good because not only were we kind of doing a little bit of indirect marketing, trying to grow the brand and what we were about, but we could directly measure whether it was being successful. But word of caution, we learned this the hard way. If you're going to do an advertising campaign like that, don't do it for 1 month. Don't do it for 2 months. Don't do it for 3 months. We did it for a solid 18 months, nonstop. We spent well over $100,000 in, I don't remember, it was year 3, between year 3 and year 4. And while at first it was so hard to stomach paying those bills every month, by months 5, 6, or 7, it really started to pay off. And we were tempted in months 2 and 3 and even 4 to just cancel it. Do not let yourself do that. I've got a company right now, a construction company, now that we're here in Arizona with my brother Caleb, who we had the podcast a couple times ago, and we're going to continue to have when we have the Holland Brothers series. And we just spent money on a marketing campaign. And I deliberately forced us or put us in a situation where we had to lock ourselves in or risk forfeiting it all for 12 months. Why? Because human nature, when you don't, especially in this day and age, because everything happens so quickly and is at our fingertips and we expect immediate responses or immediate feedback, that's just our human nature, and it's been even more accentuated with the age of technology, is to, when you don't see it work in month 1 and then month 2, you automatically cast it aside and say, well, this isn't working. Wrong. And that is something that I caution every single business owner to be very, very mindful of. Do not throw away a method of marketing or a marketing campaign that you have not given, depending on the method, at least 6 to 12 months opportunity to be successful. You've got to remember, as consumers, as businesses, whether you're business to business or you're selling direct from one business to another, or be it a consumer, business to consumer, we are inundated with marketing material on our phones, on the computer, on the televisions, on the over the radio, from our kids' mouths, from our friends' mouths, from everywhere with information. But what works, and I know this from so many different companies and having learned the hard way, is consistency in marketing. Sticking to something and giving it the opportunity to be successful. If you don't, you're going to waste a lot of money, and you may never find which method works the best for you. Now, what I encourage everybody to do is at the beginning of the year, set a marketing budget. And I recommend that it's a minimum for every company of 10% of your total revenues. If you're a growing company, I would recommend closer to 20 to 30%. I know that seems like a lot, and it is a lot, but I'm telling you, if you don't bite the bullet and spend the money on marketing, you're, number one, not going to be able to achieve the level of success that you want to achieve, and number two, you are going to be drowned out by all of your other competitors, and then you will have wasted your money. Now, I recognize, and again, I don't say this as someone who's never been there. I can't even put into words in a way that you would be able to feel how we felt when we made that decision to spend over $100,000 when we were bleeding money in year 3 and into year 4. And I am so thankful every day we did it. And Jeff and I basically sat down and said, you know what? We made a big mistake in year 2. Had we spent the money that we spent in year 3 and year 4, beginning in year 2, we could have grown probably 10 or 15 times. So by year 3, it made our decision really easy. Our local competitor had grown 2 to 3 times faster than we did because they decided to spend the marketing and we didn't. Now, they had a different financial system or financial situation, and they had some huge, heavy backers behind them that basically guaranteed everything for them. And so the risk of failure was not nearly as scary because, if they failed, they had someone there to provide them with more money. Jeff and I didn't have that benefit. And I'm glad we didn't, because it's how we learned and how we built our gut and how we built our decision-making capabilities on where should we spend marketing and where shouldn't we, and where we found out which methods were the most successful. But so year 3, it was a really easy decision. We said, well, we're going to go bankrupt if we don't spend the marketing. And if we do spend the marketing, we may go bankrupt or it's going to be wildly successful. So the risk to spend the money on the marketing was relatively small. We did it and it worked out fantastically. So let's talk about a particular form of marketing. Google Ads. Now, Google Ads is one of the most powerful means of marketing, in my opinion, in this day and age. And I have a love-hate relationship with it because it made us very successful along with radio, but it was also very instrumental in our success. And it's almost a non-negotiable in this day and age if you're a new business trying to gain customers and trying to get people to know who you are, what you do. And the beauty about it is, in spite of how incredibly complex it is, and I've been working on a new campaign for one of the companies that I own with my brother and multiple business partners focused on high-end luxury tables. I've been working through all of the aspects of doing Google ad campaigns and the tracking, and they have more information than you could ever possibly want or imagine. It's quite scary, actually. on how much they allow you to track. But my point in saying this is I could spend 40 hours a week, every single week, honing those campaigns, getting a better understanding of how it works, and really dialing in exactly what I want to get from a Google Ads campaign. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics on setting up a campaign. There's many YouTube videos out there, and Google, the company themselves, actually do a pretty good job of having a support system, especially when you get started. But what I want you to realize is if you are afraid to spend money on marketing, which I always am, regardless of how much money the company has, because I hate wasting money. But I've learned that marketing is one of those areas where you have to be comfortable testing things and trying things and taking that risk to ultimately find what's successful. And once you do, then you can focus on that particular method of marketing. But that will change over time. And it will change as your company grows, and it will change as the marketplace grows. And it will also change as technology changes. One of the biggest things coming out right now is artificial intelligence. I believe that's going to change marketing in ways we can't possibly imagine. But going back to Google Ads, if you're afraid to spend marketing, I would say this is one of the most comfortable areas where you can get as much information as possible on every single action a customer can take or a potential customer may take through your website, or or you can set up a campaign to target your phone calls. And so it makes it a little bit easier when you can see the spend and you can get as much information as you want for each particular campaign you're doing. Now, we could talk about a specific campaign, and it would probably make a little bit more sense. But let me just give you an example. I'm setting up one for this high-end table company I was telling you about. And one of the things that we make are river tables. So we pick a live slab of wood, and then we design it with epoxy. We put epoxy in the table, and there's so many millions of different creations that you can come up with. And that's known as a river table because often it looks like, depending on how you color the epoxy, like a river is flowing through the wood. Well, so I set up a river table campaign. I can figure out as much information about that campaign as I can want. Who's clicking on it, who's not clicking on it, when they're clicking on it. And you can set the campaigns up however you want. You can advertise to the entire world. You can advertise to basically one zip code. You can advertise state by state. And I've only done this in the United States, but I'm sure it's similar across countries, whether they have different states or different counties or however a country is divided up. You can get as specific and honed in as you want, and you can get as broad as you want. You can figure out the demographic of who's on the website. You can figure out the age. I mean, they have information upon information upon information. And I caution you, if you spend time into this, you can get lost, and I have gotten lost, and it can become very overwhelming. But my point in saying all of this is if you are a business, or you're listening to this today, or you're thinking about starting a business, and you're not sure how you're going to get the word out, start with Google Ads. I think that is one of the most directly measurable means to spend your marketing dollars. The other really important thing to think about marketing is different campaigns and different methods of marketing build upon themselves. And what I mean by that is when we did the radio campaign, I believe, and the numbers bear this out, that it was 5 or 10 times more successful because they had also seen our flyers in their mailboxes. They had also seen us on television. They had seen us out into the community. So it's what I like to call the compound effect, just like with interest, but in marketing. The more means or methods you utilize to market, the more powerful each one of those methods become. I think the other thing that really opened our eyes and that I would encourage you to think about is as we spent our marketing dollars, we learned how to hone in the campaign so we could more directly measure it if we were trying to do a direct marketing campaign. If we determined we're going to spend $20,000, but it's going to be all indirect marketing, meaning we're really just trying to build the brand, who we are, and if we don't get any one-to-one correlation signups for, or we can't prove it was that, that's fine. We know it's an indirect marketing campaign, we're spending this money, and we're just focused on building the brand. Once you identify that, I was a lot more comfortable saying, okay, we're spending that money, I'm not going to track it. Now, I say I'm not going to track it, meaning I won't be disappointed if I can't prove that that particular campaign gave me one customer, because I know we're just working on getting our name out there, building who we are. And in the long term, it will give us customers. With direct marketing campaigns, we had to be able to trace it or measure it in some way and know whether that campaign was being successful if we gave it enough time. And I say 6 to 12 months. It can be 18 months. It really varies based on what type of business you're in, what industry you're in, the method of marketing. But the point being is, don't give up so quickly on a particular method of marketing until you've given it an opportunity to be successful. Because you have to remember, we're all inundated constantly across multiple different channels, electronic, in person, in the mail, print, wherever, of so many different brands and companies. And so if you don't have that consistency, you're just going to get left in the dust. But getting back to, or talking about why it was so important for us to do the marketing in the multiple campaigns, we learned how to hone in each of the campaigns, and eventually we were able to figure out what our average cost per customer should be for marketing. And for us, we determined that we could spend, so year 3, we just had to throw money out there because we had no data. We had no information. We didn't know how much we should be spending on trying to get one customer. What was the acquisition cost of a customer? After we spent a bunch of money and we did a bunch of different means of marketing, we were able to hone that in. And we figured out that it was anywhere between $20 to $25 per residential customer we were able to spend on marketing, and it would pay for itself based on the average time that a customer was with us, meaning they allowed us to be their service provider. And if this sounds a little bit different, for those of you listening, you may live in a municipality where the city provides it. Well, where we lived, every customer got to choose who their garbage service provider was. It wasn't under a contract. There were some outer-lying, smaller rural communities where the city put out an RFP, a request for proposal, and garbage companies would put in their bids, and then one would get it for the whole area. But in the Chippewa Valley where we lived, primarily, you could pick any provider that you wanted. And so that made marketing all that much more important, because on any given day, a new customer, a new person moving into the area, or someone moving could decide to switch service providers. It wasn't being provided by the city. You weren't required to get your service from one particular provider because they had a contract with that particular municipality. So it was important for us to eventually realize how much we could spend per customer, and that we knew the data on how long did a customer on average stay with us. And that is the other really important thing about direct marketing campaigns. If you're going to spend money on direct marketing, you better have metrics that you can measure it. And that's why I say, if you're afraid to spend money on marketing because you're just getting started and you don't have a huge advertising budget available, Google Ads is a great way to start. Whether you're in a service industry, whether you're selling goods, it's just so measurable on so many different facets. Whereas if you do something like a TV campaign, it's a lot harder to track. Or a radio campaign, it's a lot harder to track, unless if you talk to every single customer that buys your product and they're always 100% either know that they heard you on the radio, or, and I'm not going to say not honest, but a lot of times I'll hear, how did you hear about us? And it's like the last question I want to answer as a consumer. I don't care. So I put a friend or Google or whatever. I try to be honest, but sometimes I just don't even care and I skip over it. Now, if it's required, I just put other. So you have to take those times when customers can just put that in themselves with a grain of salt. So we've talked a lot about so many aspects as it relates to marketing. I want to conclude by talking about how I think the best way to go about implementing a marketing campaign If you aren't doing any, or you're doing some, but you're not sure how you feel about them, how you can go about getting one set up, what you should be doing, how to at least get some level of organization to get started if you aren't already. First, I think it's important that at a minimum, monthly, you're having marketing meetings. I don't care how small of a company you are. If you're a sole proprietor and it's just you, have a marketing meeting with your significant other, with your spouse, with friends, get their feedback, get their ideas. I think that's really important to helping you determine what your campaign should be about. What are the most poignant points that you should be talking about for your company? I would recommend weekly meetings like this, but depending on your size, at a minimum monthly. I think step number 2 is to think about, what do you want to do with your marketing? What is your goal? Are you doing an indirect marketing campaign where you're just trying to build the image of your company, make people aware of you? You're fine if you don't have a direct correlation between that advertising spend and a particular customer or service sold or goods sold. And you recognize, if you're going to do that, you're in it for the long haul, and it doesn't happen overnight. Indirect marketing is done continually over many months, over many years, and that's when you really start seeing the benefit. Or for a particular campaign, do you want to be able to track it directly, and you want to target specifically who you are trying to be a consumer of your product, be a user of your service, and you can actually tangibly measure how successful a campaign is going to be. That's really important to distinguish between those two. And you can do both. Then I think you also have to determine what is defined as a success for a direct marketing campaign. Is getting them to your website a success? Is getting them to actually hit the purchase button a success? If you're in a service industry, let's say you're a psychologist, is actually getting a new customer a success, or just having them recognize who you are? And not everybody needs psychology services immediately or that day, but when the time comes, they think of you when they need those types of services. I think defining success with a direct marketing campaign, understanding what you're trying to measure, is really important. And then I think the last thing is, take a step back before you make any determinations. If you've thought about those things and you've got a good idea of what you want to market, how you want to market in terms of indirect or direct, I shouldn't say how, but the purpose of the marketing campaign, think about how you want to market. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many different areas that you can spend your money, and you'll get calls from so many people saying they can help you do this and they can help you do that. It's not easy to figure out where you want to spend your limited advertising dollars. And the best advice that I can give there is, try a lot of things over a long period of time and give them time to succeed. To enumerate where you can spend, and this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but just to at least get you started, all of the electronic platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Google, Yahoo, Bing, all of the search engines have some form of marketing. I don't think anybody does it better than Google Ads. If you're selling a good on Amazon, of course, you can do Amazon marketing. And one of the companies, our medical supply company, we were at a point where we were spending $5,000 a day, which, depending on how large the company is, that's not a lot. For our company, it was a tremendous amount, but it was garnering sales for us of $20,000 to $25,000 a day, and it paid for itself each and every single day. Now, we had to keep a very tight track to ensure that that was continuing, and the metric there is ROAS, return on advertising spend. But that's another means in which you can sell a product that's primarily product-based. But then think about things outside of the electronic, the tablets and the everything online. Because there's a million different places, as we all know, to get pop-up ads and everything on every different website. Think about your television. Think about your radio. Think about your newspaper. And a lot of people are like, newspapers? Who would advertise in the newspapers? Well, it depends what demographic you're trying to target. I'm relatively young, but I still read the Wall Street Journal. I would say that most people my age maybe do it digitally. I love the physical copy, but there's a ton of people that still read newspapers. It's likely, and I don't have all the statistics, but it's maybe in the older category, but that's great. If that's who you're trying to target, that might be a great area for you to advertise in. Magazines. What I'm trying to get at is set out the table of all the possibilities, and then with having had your, preliminary meeting of what you want to market, and then understanding what the purpose of the campaign, indirect versus direct, then you can determine how. How do I market? Which are the best methods or means for me to market? What platforms or what avenues? I think if you think about, you take those three things and then you be flexible, constantly analyze, constantly be willing to adjust. Don't cut something off too early. Give it 6 to 12 to 18 months, as I've said, and try multiple methods. If you can only afford one, then you're going to have to pick the best method that you think. And some of the methods, like I said, Google Ads, you can figure out, I don't want to say quickly, but it's a lot easier to track if what you're wanting to accomplish with it is being accomplished. But even that takes a minimum of 3 months, an absolute minimum, because it's all about data collection. When you're just starting marketing campaigns, so much of it is just about data collection. You're basically paying money to gather data. And as you get more and more data and you can hone in your marketing campaigns and you understand your business in terms of what you can feasibly, economically spend to acquire a new customer and still be profitable, that's why you market and you market consistently. If you have questions, if you're a business and you're trying to figure out, where do I even start? All of this is so confusing. Reach out to me. Go to our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Shoot a message over to me. Be more than happy to talk to you about it. Send me a message over Twitter, @HollandPodcast, and say, hey, I'm in this industry. I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think I should try? And I'm not going to have all the right answers. In many of the businesses that I currently operate in, especially the ones that have just been started within the last 1 or 2 years, we're going through that process. We're testing which marketing methods work and which don't. And as I said, every industry is different and every company size is different. If you're a huge corporation and you have a huge advertising budget, you can afford to spend millions of dollars across multiple venues. Well, most businesses don't have the luxury of doing that. And so every marketing situation is unique unto your industry, unto your business size, unto the goals, services, products that you're trying to get established or get a foothold in the marketplace. I know this podcast was a little bit more of a wonky one compared to the other ones, but I can't express to you enough how important it is to not forget about marketing. And that seems obvious, but I've been there. It's one of the first things to go as a business owner when you're caught up in the day-to-day operations and you're caught up in the human resources. If you're trying to wear 10 different caps at once and you don't have a whole marketing department that's exclusively thinking about that every single day, it can get lost in the weeds. Do not let that happen to you, because I will tell you, what you're trying to accomplish with your business, regardless of what you're trying to accomplish, or you're a nonprofit organization, whatever you're trying to accomplish, if you forget about that piece and you don't focus on it at a minimum once a month, and I would argue once a week, you need to make that a priority to be starting new campaigns or reflecting on the existing campaigns, measuring them. You will not gain the level of success that you want, and it's going to become more frustrating. None of us as humans wants complacency. We always want to see progress. The fastest way to kill progress in terms of getting your goods or services out there is to let marketing fall through the cracks. It happened to Jeff and to me, or two of the business, and not that it fell through the cracks, but we didn't realize just how important it was. It let our local competitor get light years ahead of us, and we really regret it. But we learned our lesson, we've learned from our mistakes, and we don't let that happen again. Don't let that happen to you. Thank you so much for joining us again this week to talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything between. Like I say every episode, remember this is a podcast where we talk about finances, we talk about legal sometimes, we talk about accounting. Don't ever take anything you hear on this podcast or any podcast and apply it directly to your situation without getting the appropriate legal or professional help in your specific situation to make sure you're making the right decisions. Thank you again so much for joining us. Don't forget to reach out to me on Twitter with any additional questions or follow me on Twitter, Holland Podcast. We'll continue this conversation. I'll answer any questions that you bring my way. If there's a guest you want me to have on, something in business you want us to talk about that we haven't, this podcast is only as good as we collectively make it. So don't be hesitant to reach out and provide feedback, thoughts, constructive criticism. That's how we get better. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, Holland Podcast. That's Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.